So I mentioned in my video on what's wrong with the world that I had noticed basically three schools of thought, and one of them, the school of thought that says basically the elites have screwed some things up, but they mean well and they have the power to change things, so we'll give them gentle advice on what to do. And I gave these two examples of Alienated America by Tim Carney and Dream Hoarders by Richard Reeves, because Carney is a wealthy Christian social conservative, and Richard Reeves is a liberal from the Brookings Institute addressing the Democrats. But they have the idea that, okay, we're going to address the elites on our side and we will fix the problems. Someone who I realized after filming the video I should have included, who is sort of different, because even though he's a Democrat, he was much more sort of trying to appeal to everyone with a policy that is more not clearly partisan, is Andrew Yang in his book The War on Normal People and his idea of a UBI. And so I wanted to talk about that in this video today, talk about quickly why, because I supported it for most of my life and I've come around to not supporting it now because I believe that it will never be implemented as a UBI. I believe we will probably see something that is called a UBI in our lifetime, but it's going to be designed so that it doesn't do any of the things that a UBI should do. And I also think that a lot of the things Yang worried about are less concerning now than I did at the time I read it. But I remember when I read this book, I was like, wow, he gets it, and he gets things that like the people around me were just not getting. And so I'm going to have a video sometime soon, I think, on books where I've had that reaction where it was like, wow, and it really sort of got me thinking. But I had been supporting a UBI before then, and so so the idea of a UBI is, as we've had automation, so you had the agricultural revolution, which meant that suddenly there were fewer people needed to produce enough food, so people went into the cities, and you had the Industrial Revolution. And now, instead of most people working on the farm, most people worked in manufacturing. Then you had the Managerial Revolution and a switch to a service economy. And now with automation, you're having a switch. A lot of these managerial jobs are potentially being outsourced. And the people who will be successful are people who are going to be really good at a kind of high-level problem solving that most people either can't do or don't have the interest in building the skills to be able to do. And so people Andrew Yang calls normal people. And so you can't retrain those people for the economy of tomorrow if that is what those jobs are going to look like. And one of the things I've changed is I don't think all the jobs of tomorrow are going to look like this. I think there are still going to be a lot of jobs that don't require this kind of thinking. And I think a lot of people, given the opportunity, would be interested in and able to develop these skills as well. But at the time, I was sort of fatalistic about this too. And so if that's happening, then what you would presumably want to do is you would want to give people enough money that they can live like a comfortable, dignified life, even if they aren't working, for the people who can't do this. And not so much that if you can get a job doing this and you're interested, you wouldn't do it. But the assumption is most people are increasingly not going to be able to work anyways. And we're already seeing a rise of especially young men without college degrees just dropping out of the workforce and living off their parents. And when all the boomers die, what's going to happen? We don't know to these people. And a lot of them are getting disability, or they're veterans and they are getting veteran disability, whatever that's called. But for those who don't have those things, what's going to happen to those people? And are we going to see more of those people? And what do we do if we do? And so the idea of a UBI is, well, if you just give everybody money. So one thing to keep in mind is means testing stuff ends up being very expensive very quickly and bloating bureaucracy. So the point of a UBI is that it is universal. You're just giving every adult citizen at least, the same amount of money, and it should be enough to live comfortably even if you aren't working, and live with some degree of dignity. And so that was my understanding. That was the idea of a UBI, the reasoning and why. But what I've noticed, so a couple things. So one thing is when I read this book, I was very confused by why Andrew Yang kept emphasizing that his proposed UBI would be only $1,000 a month so that it would incentivize people to want to work. Because I'm like, $1,000 a month, there are very few parts of the country you can live on that comfortably. And if the point of a UBI is that there just aren't going to be jobs for people, if these people want to work but the opportunities aren't there, why are you doing this? And the answer is that he's appealing to the ideas, the prejudices of the people he's writing for, the elites who make the policies, who do believe that that nobody wants to work anymore, when most people have a drive to work, from what I've seen, at least in our culture. They just want work that is fulfilling, that they have autonomy, that they are recognized for, that they're they want meaningful work. And nobody wants to work anymore is because the people who run these big companies want to treat people like cogs in a machine and pay them terribly. And yeah, nobody wants to do that. Yes. But people want to work. And even if you were paying like $2,000 a month, that would still be hard to live on in most of the US, but there's at least a lot of places you could live there with reasonable dignity. And so I was like, okay, so the proposal Yang was making, like, this is not going to be enough to like live with enough dignity and comfort to actually start exploring. Because if you're getting $1,000 a month and that's all you have to live on, you're going to be trapped in defend mindset. You're not going to be able to actually get yourself out of that and innovate and develop new businesses. And I was thinking the point of a UBI was you get people to the point that they are actually not overly comfortable, but at least like secure enough that they can explore. I might start working for myself and building their own businesses. And I'm realizing that is a feature and not a bug, because the people who make the policy, they don't want competitors. They don't want people making their own businesses. And the other thing is, as I said, a universal basic income. The whole point is that it is universal, because what we have seen with means testing of welfare programs is you have a couple of things. So one is you have the welfare trap, where they are designed to have these cliffs that make it hard for people to get out. And even things that try to reform that still end up keeping these cliffs in. So when you're stuck, at least if you're... The people who end up getting a lot of our social support programs tend to either be people who are just stuck there forever, or they tend to be relatively middle-class people who have fallen on hard times. And you don't see the people who are like working poor try to avoid falling into it because it's hard to get out of when you're poor. And so keeping it low in means testing would create that problem. It would also create a vast bureaucracy like we have for means testing other programs which have driven the prices up. However, what have you actually seen with UBI research? Well, you've seen two kinds of research. One is you go to poor countries and you give everybody money, which is a small amount of money for those countries. And you see that, yeah, they actually start improving their lives, buying things that will let them make more money in the long term. And that is really beneficial. And then what do you see in developed countries? You see means-tested programs. So they're not UBI, generally. So they're giving money to people who are poor, who are getting other programs. They're giving just no strings attached. You meet the qualifications, so we're giving you this money. And what you see is they report they are working less, they are less burned out, they're feeling better, but otherwise their lives are no better. And the critics are saying, well, that doesn't really seem like anyone can report anything, but it doesn't seem like on any meaningful metric their lives are better. And I'm looking at that and I'm saying, my intuition as someone who has been on that level of burnout is you need to get past the burnout before you can actually start moving your life forward. And for people who are poor and come from a poor background, they don't necessarily have the skills and knowledge of how to do that. And if you're still feeling kind of trapped, it is hard to get to a point where you're exploring that. And I feel like if you were in a developed country doing this with people of all incomes, if it was actually universal, at least for a locality, what you would see is that middle-class people actually do end up improving their lives meaningfully. And I think that if you had more time and or more money, poor people would do the same thing, but it would take learning the skills to actually do that, which right now they don't have, and they're just barely getting out of that feeling trapped mindset, and that's being dismissed. And I'm looking at these two things, and I'm okay, so what I'm seeing is if there's going to be a UBI in the US at least, it's going to, first of all, it's not going to be livable. It's going to be deliberately set at a level where it is very hard to have a meaningful life out of it. And then the second thing is it is going to be means tested. So it's not going to be a UBI. It's going to just be a new entitlement or welfare program, something of that nature, where you have the same issues of you're going to have the welfare trap and other people have written on this, and that there are always policies that try to address it, and the politicians, they just keep making it the same way. And then you're going to have the bloated expansion of the bureaucracy for the means testing, as well as the requirements that can often be humiliating. And I'm okay, yeah, so there's going to be a UBI probably in my lifetime, but it's not going to be a UBI like I imagined it. It's not even going to be a UBI because it's not going to be universal. And at the same time, I do think that there are going to be more opportunities than just being the one to do this high-level stuff, especially because I've realized most of the people who have jobs doing the high-level stuff are not actually good at it. They're just good at pretending, but they come from like the class where they do. And so I think, first of all, a lot of these jobs, you don't actually need to be good at it. You just need to be convincing. But then I think there are going to be jobs that don't require this very specific kind of thinking that Andrew Yang is good at, that I'm good at, that a lot of people aren't good at. And the other thing is, I really think that a lot of people can learn it and would have the interest in learning it if they can understand why. It's just, right now, we culturally actively disincentivize it, starting with the public education system. So anyways, wanted to talk about that quickly. I also wrote a blog post about this that I'll link back in the fall. Thanks for watching. I'm Magpie, this is Leela, and I'll see y'all in the next one.